Good afternoon. Welcome to the Post and Courier's Beyond the Headlines. I'm Mitch Pugh. I'm the executive editor with the Post and Courier. This is an ongoing program where we take you behind our reporting and tell you a little bit more about what went into the stories that you see in our newspaper and online. Today, I'm joined by public service and watchdog editor Glenn Smith and reporter Thad Moore. Before we get started, I'll just remind everybody that after our program today, you will receive an email that has a link to the recording of this presentation, a little bit more about the story, and ways to contact the reporters and editors that are on the program today. So keep an eye out for that, and we appreciate any feedback that you can provide us. Of course, if you're a subscriber, thank you. Thank you for supporting the work that we do. We couldn't do it without you. If you're not a subscriber, it's a great time to become one. We've got an offer on our website right now that is among the best we've ever had for $4 for the first 4 months. So I encourage you to take a look at that too. But let's dive right on into today's topic. Two members of the prominent Murdaugh family were shot dead in rural Colleton County in early June. Since then, information about what has happened has been scarce. And of course, rumors have spread quickly. The story has captured the attention of the Low Country and beyond, making national headlines. I'm sure many of you have seen. Today, we're going to talk to Glenn and Thad a little bit more about why this case has garnered so much attention, the legal issues that are involved, including some that have entangled this newspaper, and then what might come next. So we're just going to dive right on in, as I said, and kind of just jump into the story. I'd like to start with probably Thad and then Glenn. Let's start kind of big picture. There's a reason why this story has garnered so much attention, and a lot of it has to do with the family at the center of it. So Thad, can you start maybe by telling us a little bit more about who the Murdaugh family is, why they're so well known, and what their influence is in that region of South Carolina and in the state as a whole?
Yeah, so the Murdaughs are from Hampton County, the town of Hampton, which is sort of in the southern tip of the state. And they have sort of long been a prominent family in legal circles down that way. So the Murdaughs from 1920 to 2005, if I've got my dates right, had 3 generations of solicitors, which is the South Carolina word for prosecutor. So they ran the prosecutor's office in 5 counties at the southern end of the state for more than 80 years. And sort of as they were wielding control in that office, also built a really successful and large law practice focused on sort of civil cases. So particularly through this sort of now notorious and closed loophole, which allows basically anyone to sue a railroad. You used to be able to sue a railroad in any county of the state if you had an accident. I guess the Murdaughs found that the jury pool in Hampton County was very favorable to plaintiffs. So the result of that is they built this reputation for winning really large verdicts, to the point, actually, I was reading through some paperwork the other day, and there's a thing in South Carolina where judges, when they are either up for election or re-election, they have to list the notable cases that they've handled if they've been on the bench. And one of the judges in Hampton County, she listed as one of her notable cases this one railroad case. And she said it was notable because there was actually a verdict for the defense in Hampton County, and she used like 3 exclamation points. So that kind of tells you that they've been very successful at winning cases, really large cases. I forget the number. I think it was about a dozen cases that they boast of being multi-million-dollar verdicts. All out of this small town. It's a town of like 2,500 people, but they have a really prominent law firm there. I think it's 17 attorneys they have on staff. So really outsized influence in a not especially large place.
Glenn, is there anything else that you would add to that sort of synopsis of the family and its connections there?
Yeah, I think, in addition to sort of, the verdicts and everything they reached, they're pretty colorful characters, at least the early generations of the family. Randolph the First, he's in power for, 20 years, and then he gets hit on his way home by a freight train. Kind of ironic, where their practice goes after that, gets killed in a freight train accident. He had been grooming his son to step in for him. Buster Murdaugh takes over, handles a lot of death penalty cases, just a very outsized influence in the county. At one point, he gets charged with aiding and abetting a bootlegging operation down there. The sheriff ends up going to jail, but Buster's found innocent, retakes his seat, ends up holding it for nearly 50 years. Then when he goes, his son takes over. So they just have had a remarkable hold on power and money down there. They own something in the neighborhood of 1,700 acres in Hampton and Colleton County. So that name just looms large over that whole region.
Great, thanks. Obviously, what happened in June was a huge tragedy, and anytime you see that kind of loss of life, it's very sad. Unfortunately for that family, though, it's not the first brush in recent years with the law, and I think they in recent years were in the news related to the death of Mallory Beach. Dad, can you tell us a little bit more about that case and what happened there as we move our way in toward the criminal investigation that's happening now?
Yeah. So the Mallory Beach case, this was in 2019, and sort of one of the attorneys, there's a lot of sort of family connections, so bear with me here.
Sure.
But the son of Alex Murdaugh, who's one of the attorneys at the family law firm in Hampton, he basically was. It took a couple of months to play out, but he was charged with boating under the influence. Essentially, he and a group of friends had attended an oyster roast north of Beaufort, and they were boating down to a family house south of the city. And sort of it was a cold night. In the dark of the night, the throttle opened and they sort of rammed into a bridge piling, which sent all of the passengers into the water. Only 5 came out, and Mallory Beach was found a week later. So Paul was charged in 2019 with boating under the influence, two counts of BUI causing great injury and 1 count of BUI causing death. And I think what's sort of notable about that case is that it started to put a lot of focus on sort of the family's hold on power, or historically in that area. We saw the solicitor, the current solicitor, who's not a Murdoch, down there recused his office from handling the case. So it was actually handled by the Attorney General's office. And that's sort of come up in this case as well, where the same solicitor has not recused himself from this murder investigation, although he is overseeing it. So basically it started to sort of open these questions, these ethical questions, and started to reveal sort of the historic closeness between this family and the legal apparatus.
And that case is still ongoing, correct? I believe there's also a civil suit, but that has not been settled, correct?
Yeah, so the civil suit essentially deals with, so Paul at the time was underage, so the civil suit is dealing with essentially how he was able to obtain alcohol. So he was criminally charged. What we've heard from the Attorney General's office is that they plan to drop the charges. I guess there's some sort of paperwork about sort of confirming his death and the shooting. But there is sort of a secondary investigation that we're aware of, the details of which are mostly unknown or pretty thin at this point. But basically, there's an investigation into the way that the boat crash investigation was handled. So it's an investigation into the investigation. It's a little meta.
Sure.
Yeah, that's where we stand now.
So Gwen, I'm going to turn to you here, and then we'll get into the most recent case. But this is not the only sort of case that's got new light shed on it as a result of these killings. There's also the case of the young man that I think initially it was ruled a hit and run that died on a road down there. Can you talk a little bit about that case and who that was and where we stand with that?
Yeah, it's a fellow named Stephen Smith. And Stephen was on his way, I believe, home on the night of in July 2015. And it appears he ran out of gas. His car was found a few miles away, and they found his body in the middle of this sort of deserted rural road. And initially, the highway patrol is called out there, and people at the scene look, and it appears that he has a gunshot wound to the head. So the highway patrol is sort of waved off and sleds called in. Then they do an autopsy and find out that the head wound is not a gunshot wound at all. The pathologist seems to think it might have been caused by the side view mirror of a passing vehicle, maybe a semi truck. So then it began just to look again like a hit and run, although the state troopers are skeptical of that because there's no skid marks, there's no debris in the roadway, there's a number of things. He's still wearing his sneakers. Oftentimes in these incidents, someone might be thrown out of their shoes. So state trooper, particularly one of the lead state troopers on the case, who has been rather vocal about this, disputes this finding. And recently, SLED announced that they were taking a look at this case again, revisiting this case because of information that surfaced as a result of the double homicide case that they're already working on. What that information is, nobody's really clear. It's been pointed out before that if you look through the Highway Patrol's investigative report on this, you will see the Murdaugh name pop up several times, along with other people's names. There was a lot of tips being phoned in, a lot of theories being floated. And so the Murdaugh name has been sort of hovering over that case for a while. And I know the mom of Stephen Smith has been really pushing for an in-depth investigation for several years now. And so where this will go, I mean, it's cast a whole, whole nother side to this now.
Sure. Well, let's turn to the double homicide case. A reader, Timothy Burke, and others asked a lot of questions about what the police know, what they don't know, who the suspects might be. A lot of this we don't know, but maybe start with you, Glenn. What do we know right now about what happened that night and where we are in the investigation?
Yeah, you're right, Mitch. The SLED and the Colleton County Sheriff's Office have said very little about what went on. So some of it we've been able to piece together by talking to sources that we know in different circles familiar with the investigation. And then there's just a wild sort of mass of rumors floating around. What we do know is on the night of June 7th, around 10 p.m., shortly after 10 p.m., a 911 call comes in from Alex Murdaugh, reporting that his wife, Maggie, 52, his son, Paul, 22, have been found dead at the family's hunting lodge property, Mazzell. It's a very large tract of land. You can't see it from the road all that well. Home to a 5,000 square foot hunting facility, been in the family for years. So they go out there, and what we've been told, again, not all by police, but they find the bodies out there. Apparently 2 guns have been used. One's a shotgun, one is an AR-15. And they both, multiple shots, killed with different guns. Maggie's found maybe as much as 20 yards away from Paul. And that is about it. They put out that there is no immediate threat to the community, which was certainly confusing to people because one would think you have a double murder on the loose with a pair of firearms. So why isn't there a threat? So that it's been sort of a very confusing narrative. Is there a threat? Is there not a threat? It took days before they released even the scant details that they have released. Unfortunately, by not releasing more information on the case, it's really just fed this wildfire of rumors that, we're not going to get into all the speculation, supposition here, but I mean, it's fantastical tales.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's where sort of the newspaper then got involved. Typically, in an investigation like this, if it's the city of Charleston or North Charleston, you will get what's called an incident report. It has the basic information of what police responded to, what they found when they got there. But often in cases in which SLED is called in, we have run into this problem. Glenn, I'll let you talk a little bit more about it, where the local agency says, no, SLED's the agency that should hand over this public information. And this is public information under South Carolina law. This should be made available to any member of the public who asks for it. So the local agency will point to SLED. SLED will point to the local agency. And to your point, the public learns very little, and then rumors start to spread. But that's been an ongoing issue that we've dealt with. Glenn, can you talk a little bit more about how that manifests itself, and again, as you kind of mentioned, what it leads to in cases like this?
Yes, so the state's Freedom of Information Act says that anybody, any citizen, you don't have to be a journalist, can walk into a police agency and ask to see reports that detail the substance location.
Did we lose him?
I think we might have lost Glenn. Do you want to jump in there, Thad, and talk a little bit
Sure.
more about what you know about how these records work, and what we usually get or don't get?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Glenn is the expert on it, but yeah. So the Freedom of Information Act, it basically is the public's right to know or to inspect government records, sort of in general. There's sort of special rules that apply for police reports, but one. Oh.
Let's just keep going.
Back. Phantom Glenn is back.
Well, to your point, I mean, I'll just jump in and say, to your point, the reason that we jumped into this and decided to eventually file suit was for those reasons. So these are public records that any one of you on this call should be able to walk into an agency and gain access to. Now, look, the police do have, and the authorities do have freedoms under that law to redact information that might interfere with, I think the exact language is something along the lines of might interfere with a prospective police action. And generally speaking, Glenn, now that you're back, do you want to say what that means?
All right, sorry about that. I don't know how much of that you heard. I just
well, we've moved on to why we filed suit and what police can and cannot redact from a report.
Okay. Yeah, they can redact information that invades personal privacy, like birth dates or social security numbers. They can also redact information that can affect a prospective law enforcement action. If they're getting close to an arrest in a case, they can withhold some key details, I guess, that would not tip off the killer or whatever. But they don't have widespread power to just not put out anything. As I started to say before, you should be able to walk into a police agency anytime within a 14-day period without an open records request and just get a basic report that gives you the basic details of the crime. What police agencies over the years have done, though, to get around getting that information out to the public is they start hiding stuff in supplemental reports. As in this case, we got a one-line report from the Colleton County Sheriff's Office. It basically said this happened, and then see the supplemental reports for details. Now, state lawmakers changed the FOIA law back in the late 1990s to address this and make all reports available. But some police agencies either aren't aware of that or choose to be not aware of that and don't comply with the law. So, and then we run into a situation as we have here when another outside agency like SLED is brought in and they say, where do you go for information? And they say, go there and point in both directions. And it becomes this circular chase and the information doesn't come out. Again, they can redact certain details, but not just refuse to release the report in total or wipe everything out. What does this do when you don't have the information? It does precisely what we were talking about before. It fuels the rumor mill. I mean, we certainly don't need details or want to put details out there that are going to interfere with the arrest of the killers. We're not trying to, destroy the investigation. We're not trying to help somebody who's committed a crime. But people, who live in that area deserve to know what the threat is. They deserve to know what happened and what their families may be at risk, how the investigation is being conducted, and some basic details.
Yeah. And to that point, a lot of the questions that have come in from readers ahead of this program today and in the Q&A function on the webinar. If you don't know that's available to you, there's at the bottom of your screen. If you click on the Q&A function, you can put a question in there. A lot of them are around things like, well, what about the mom's cell phone? What do we know about that? What do we know about where the guns were found, or why were the guns there? Why did they take the cars? These are all things that sometimes a report like this would have some answers to. But in this case, one, it wasn't released until after the Post and Courier filed the suit. And then within, I think, about 24 hours, the report came out, but it was heavily redacted. Very, very little information in there. We are, the update for us in terms of where we are in the suit, There's been some pretrial conferencing happening. The judge is looking at those redactions. So there may be more news that comes out of that. But to your point, that's what it does, is it drives a lot of questions that may be able to be answered without compromising the investigation, and may help the public feel less, concerned or unsafe. But like you said, this is a common thing that we run into. So one of our goals in filing this suit wasn't so much, we know there's information they're going to be able to withhold, and we're okay with that. What we really want is some sort of precedent here that says, in a case like this, when SLED or a larger outside agency comes in, who's responsible for making sure public information that, as Glenn rightly pointed out, should be made available to any member of the public when they walk into one of these police agencies? Who's responsible for making sure that information is released in accordance with South Carolina Freedom of Information law? And that's just been something that's been confusing in cases like this. Well, let's and so I think that's a good way to kind of move into another question that we got from our readers. Rosemary Williams wanted to know, journalistically, where is the line between what we were just talking about, the public's right to know and what's going on and what's happening there, and law enforcement's right to finish the investigation before sharing that information? And who really decides that, and how do they make that decision? I don't know, Glenn, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any other story. I think you weigh the public value in putting some of this stuff out, the damage it could do. You try to be responsible for this information. Certainly there's stuff that the police have that they've found. They're clearly struggling to find suspects and to narrow the field here. So you don't want to give anything out that's overly, I guess, salacious or unnecessary, or that could aid and abet the people responsible. I think you have to evaluate the information and what the public good is in releasing that. If it shines some light on how the investigation's being handled, the appropriateness of certain steps that are being taken, if it shines some light on the potential threat to the community, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, so there's the legal piece of this in terms of what the police are allowed to withhold and not withhold, and those pieces. And then there's the journalism side of this. And Thad, I know you've talked to a lot of people. Both you and Glenn have heard a lot of rumors. There's been a lot of things spread on social media, other websites and places. National news has come in with slightly different approaches to covering a story like this. We live here. We have a little bit of a different way we do it. Talk about how you're managing and juggling all these things you're hearing, and then determining what is it that we feel comfortable reporting.
Yeah, it's a hard question. Well, it's tricky because there's so little, right, that we do know for sure or officially. And so I think obviously, look, if something's just a straight up rumor, we might try to check it out as best we can, but like realistically, there's a lot of speculation that we're just not going to be able to do that. Like, we don't have subpoena power, we're not police, like that's not our role here. So it's really just trying to separate the wheat from the chaff there. And I think really, like, to me, the way I've been thinking about this, one thing that's been really, from my perspective, working on covering this case, is like just how much interest there's been in this case. I think is interesting to me. A little meta, I know, but I've just been trying to sort of remind people when they have asked me, like, why aren't you writing more about this, or why don't we know this yet, or whatever, that while I think, especially as you get more distant from Hampton or from South Carolina or whatever, there's been all these comments like, oh, this just feels like it's made for like a Netflix true crime series, or like this feels like a murder mystery novel. Well, I get that. Like, it's not. It's not those things, right? Like, this is a real thing that happened to real people. All of these cases that we talked about, the Stephen Smith case, Mallory Beach case, like all of these things are real things. They're not some hypothetical, they're not some fictional thing. And so I think it's just sort of keeping that as the frame. Like, we are here to find out what is true, and not to stir the pot with rumors or anything like that. That's not our goal here. I think to sort of keeping focused on that as sort of the frame that we're evaluating information through, if that makes sense.
You can cause real harm, right? Real damage to all these people had families and friends and associates, and casting shade on a particular person or thing that looks kind of interesting, and we could be ahead of the pack in reporting that. I mean, that can do real damage to someone's reputation if you don't have that sourced well, or it can get people's hopes up, or it can do a million different things that are unintended. I think you have to be as confident in the facts that you're putting out there as you can possibly be. And, again, there's tremendous hunger for information on this case. I get that. I mean, I want to know more too. But I think it's our job to sort of sift through that and put it out in the most responsible way we can.
Yeah, to that point, Glenn, I mean, there's sort of three main tenets that we follow as journalists, right? Like one, we're not going to be unduly influenced by outside entities, whether that be an advertiser or a group of readers. We can't operate that way. We have to operate independently at all times. That's one of our key tenets. Another one is to report as fully as possible. To report everything that we know, that we can do so responsibly. In full, and that's a huge part of our one of our tenets. And the third one is to minimize harm, and this is often where, as journalists, we see the biggest conflict is between this value of reporting as fully and truthfully as possible and minimizing harm. And when we say harm, look, almost everything that we write, especially in a case like this, could cause harm to someone, but it's a matter of balancing the severity of that impact. And to what Thad and Glenn both said is we have to remember that these are real people with real families who are our neighbors, and in some cases, friends and maybe even family. We went through this during both the Walter Scott and Mother Emanuel stories, which are huge national stories, and these outside media entities come in, and I think they try to be respectful and do a great job, but they don't live here. We live here. This is our home, and I think we do try to be as responsible as we possibly can in these cases. But it's difficult because, as both of you know, everyone wants to know a lot of things that either aren't knowable or that we're not comfortable reporting. I'm looking through, and I appreciate everybody putting questions into the Q&A here, asking us things like, is Mr. Murdaugh a suspect? Stuff about the firearms. We would answer these, but we just don't know yet, and we don't know in a way that we feel comfortable reporting or even talking publicly about it, because that's not responsible for us to do. But there is one good question in here that I thought I would ask. At what point does an outside agency come into this? I know SLED's involved, but I have several questions in here asking about the FBI. Should the FBI be involved? Is there an involvement for them in a case like this, and how would that work?
Want me to handle that, or
yeah,
I can handle the SLED part. You can handle FBI if you want. What's
that? Sorry,
I said I can handle the SLED part if you want to handle FBI.
Yeah, I mean, FBI generally handles cases that involve some sort of an interstate, national flavor. I mean, you can't have local cases that they pick up if it's involving something like, say a hit was called in from Oklahoma or something, and it's over interstate telephone lines or communicated across. That's generally where the FBI comes in, or if they're called in for their lab techniques or profiling or something that's outside the capabilities of local law enforcement. SLED is sort of a different subject. They're the state's top police agency. They have statewide jurisdiction, and they regularly come in to help police agencies, particularly in rural areas, maybe that aren't as well equipped as some of the urban places. And SLED has quite a long history down in Colleton County. Back several years ago, there was gang warfare down there. There's all these territorial groups that were fighting it out and shooting each other. And it sort of all culminated in this big drive-by shooting at a birthday party, and this little girl was killed and her uncle was killed, and it was tremendously sad and tragic. and the community was demanding help, and the sheriff's office down there was doing what they could, but they didn't have the capabilities, I think, to tackle this problem on their own. SLED ended up moving its regional offices out of North Charleston and down to Walterboro in Colleton County to assist. So they've got a relationship down there. Again, the Colleton people aren't really cluing us in 100% as to why they called in, but imagine that. And Thad, you can speak to the conflict as well.
Yeah, so we do know that that Colleton County, the sheriff's office, called in SLED basically 20 minutes after the first 911 call came in, so really quickly. And then they later handed their office is still involved in the investigation, but the lead agency now is SLED, and the reason for that is that Alex Murdaugh, so Maggie's husband and Paul's father, is a part-time prosecutor for the 14th Circuit Solicitor's Office, which handles the Colleton County Sheriff's Office's cases. And so they felt that that was conflict of interest, and that's why they handed off the case. Obviously, like I mentioned, the Solicitor's Office has not removed itself from this case, but that's kind of the state of play. And I think to the point about, like, would it be appropriate for the FBI? Is there some sort of cross-state line element here? I mean, that I think falls into the bucket of, like, we just don't know what we don't know. I mean, to the point of the redactions in the reports that SLED has put out now after our lawsuit, it's redacted so heavily that there's some things we know that they redacted, like the number of shell casings they recovered, or like the vehicles that they impounded. We know that they impounded vehicles. We don't know what vehicles. They also blacked out something about, like, whether there was forced entry on the property. But then the other redactions are so extensive, it'll be sort of like an officer's narrative, and it'll say, like, I arrived, and then black lines, and then nothing further. Like, that's the only, so we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, that's the thing that's really frustrating. And I know it's frustrating for me as a reporter and also for all of our readers. But yeah, so whether it's appropriate for someone else to come in, we don't really know where they're at.
It's like the firearms too. I mean, that's another thing. Again, I mean, it's a hunting lodge, so you expect there to be firearms on the property. Were these the Murdaugh's firearms? We don't know. Some people have said that this military style rifle that was covered, this AR-15, well, that must be a substantial clue, right? It's this assault rifle in some people's eyes. Well, you talk to people down there and they say, well, it's pretty common for folks out in the country to have these to pick off hogs and coyotes and things of that nature. Would not be uncommon to find something like that, particularly out on a large hunting lodge. So I know you can grasp onto these little details, I guess, and go down all sorts of wormholes on there, but until we know more, it's really difficult to say what it all means.
And yeah, to Thad's point about the frustration, I'm seeing that a little bit in the questions that are coming in, and certainly prior to today, emails and calls that we get. And I think we all understand that. We wish we could tell you more, and we could probably tell you more that we've heard, but that would not be responsible because we don't know if it's true or not. And one of our, the things that we have to do is when we hear leads or tips or theories, we have to go out and try to report these and be able to prove that there's some facts here. There has to be a fact pattern that we can follow. I know someone in the Q&A essentially accused us of being afraid to go after this story. I can assure you that's not the case. We would not be filing a lawsuit if that were the case. We wouldn't have 4 reporters working on this almost exclusively, including Thad and Glenn. It's just a very complicated, difficult case to understand and get information on. And there are a lot of ethical areas here that we're going to be very careful to manage. And I would hope that, and I believe that the vast majority of our readers expect that from us. And they don't want us to turn into a gossip sheet. And I don't think that's our intention at all. So as we get close here to wrapping up, let's talk about what's next, because I think that's, there's a lot of frustration, I think, from our readers, from the public at large, within our building, about how little of information is out there. What are the next steps, as you guys, and maybe start with Glenn, what can we expect to see, do you think, in the next few weeks? And maybe talk a little bit about, as much as you can, what you and your team are doing to continue to report the story.
Yeah, so I think, hopefully we'll know a whole lot more soon. I tend to wonder if that'll be the case, though, when you see SLED setting up a 24-hour tip line and you see the family offering $100,000 reward and things like that. That tells me, as a longtime crime reporter, that they're probably not close. Or maybe they need a lot more information to maybe they have some suspicions, but need a whole lot more information to get there. In the meantime, I guess we're trying to better understand the Murdaugh family, their activities over the years, who these people were as individuals, business-wise, things of that nature, and the other cases as well. We're digging into the Stephen Smith case and trying to understand as much as we can about that. We've already got quite a bit on the Mallory Beach case, but again, just reaching out to the people involved there, trying to see how this might all fit together. We're running down tips too. People call in and some of them don't pan out, right? And some of them, like I said, are quite fantastical. Could they turn out to be true? Maybe so. I mean, this is just a bizarre case. And, I'd urge anybody who's out there, if someone says you're afraid of tackling this, I don't know, give us a call. By all means, share the information you think we're afraid of going after. I can assure you we'll check into it. I'm not going to assure you that we're going to feel comfortable printing it right away without some verification, but we're running down every lead that comes in and going with as strong a story as we can.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to try to start to wrap up. We'd like to keep these beyond the headlines to about a half hour. People are on their lunch break, so they can get back to work or whatever they have going on today. We had a large group show up for this one today, so thank you for taking the time on a busy Thursday before a holiday to listen to us talk about this story and to ask questions and to engage on the topic. As Glenn said, his email and contact information and Thad's will be in a follow-up email that you will receive along with a recording of this presentation. If you have questions, things you think we should be looking into, as Glenn said, topics that we should be investigating, you think we haven't gone after hard enough, we'd love to hear that. And that's the lifeblood of what we do, the tips and ideas that come in from our readers. So please do reach out and let us know if you have things like that. And like I said, in the interim, you'll get an email shortly after this ends with the recording and the contact information. Encourage you to check that out, share it with friends if you'd like. The recording will be made available on our events website, postingcourier.com/events. Within the next 24 hours or so. And again, if you're a subscriber or even a donor to our investigative fund, thank you for your support. Being the reason we can go after the story hard with 4 reporters, the reason that we can afford to file a lawsuit is because of your support of the journalism that we do. So we really appreciate that. If you're not a subscriber, we really appreciate you considering it. postingcourier.com/subscribe. Really great offer going right now. So please do check that out if you're so inclined. In the interim, we're going to keep digging. There'll be no shortage of stories. Just keep your eyes peeled to postingcourier.com. Download our app to get push alerts on the latest information, and we'll make sure we get that out to you. Really appreciate you all coming out this afternoon, and we'll be back next week with another topic. But again, thank you all for your support, and have a great holiday weekend.
We're in an industry that's shifting a lot, and there are all kinds of metrics and things you can value. And I think that what we've sort of prioritized is having a deep relationship with our readers and a commitment to our community. And I think that not everyone in the industry really has that focus. And I think it matters because there are stories that wouldn't have been covered if not for this paper.